Thank you for watching this online class presentation from Cedarville University. Did you know 100% of Cedarville freshmen receive generous financial aid? Cedarville is doing everything we can to make our academically excellent, distinctively Christian education more affordable for families. We invite you to learn more at cedarville.edu.
Wizard of Id. This is also a cartoon that is authored by the guy who wrote the original cartoon we looked at in Genesis chapter 3 where the snake gets beat over the head. Remember that cartoon? Wrote this one too. The little wizard, the king, goes to his doctor who tells him, of course, to cut out salt and cut out sweets, cut out smoking and cut out booze. And the little king says, what else does it live for? Doctor says, I don't know, but if you come up with anything, scratch it. Okay, a little sympathy laugh here anyway. I agree. This is not the most funny cartoon in the world, but as you can probably imagine, there's a method to my madness here. And the reason why I show this cartoon is actually because it's not very funny. And one of the things that's most unfunny about it is that what it actually portrays, I think, is the way an awful lot of us think about God himself. Now, you wouldn't say it. It's not politically right. You know, it's not Cedarville correct to say it, right? But there's this underlying feeling, I think, that if you actually took your entire life and put it in God's hands, he would diagnose it such that everything that you enjoy, you love, he would take out. I think we sometimes teach this sort of thing in a subtle ways, right? You've heard testimonies where people say, I told God that there were two things I hated, I didn't want to do. I hate hot climates and I hate snakes, and God made me a missionary in Central America, right? Or something like that. Or people talk about full-time surrender as though you're going down in some sort of defeat. And I just want to say that even though we would not get this wrong on a test, we know it's not right to say, I think that down deep inside, this picture captures a lot of the way we tend to feel about God. And part of the reason I love the book of Ecclesiastes is because it really gets at our view of who God is and what God is like. Or let me put it another way, and maybe this will shock you, but let me ask it like this. Would God fit in my circle of friends? If you were getting together with your friends on Friday night to go do whatever it is you do, and you were packed in the car, and just before you took off in the parking lot, God shows up in the flesh, knocks on the door and says, hey, can I come? What would your response be? Would you say, oh no, we're going to have to change our plans now, or this is going to ruin the party, or would you say the party's about to begin? Probably you wouldn't say that, right? Or it's not just a test of your friends, it's like, would God just be any fun as a friend? Now, you probably never considered that question before. In fact, there may be a number of you, and maybe rightly so, who are saying to yourself, is it even right to ask those kind of questions? Because if God showed up at the door of the car, you wouldn't invite him in to party. You'd fall down on your knees and you'd worship him because he's the Lord God in heaven above, right? You shouldn't even ask those kind of questions. Would he be any fun as a friend? Because he's not that. He is God Almighty, right? And I understand both those perspectives. But let me just put it this way, and let me tell you another story. Many years ago, I had a girlfriend. And I wanted this girlfriend to become my fiancée. But in order to make that happen, I had to have the talk with Daddy. Right? So we arranged for me to have this lunch with Roy. And my girlfriend and her sister thought, you know, this guy needs a little help. We're going to have to school him just a little bit. So they gave me like a little preview of what Daddy was going to ask. Don't exactly know how they knew this, but maybe it was family conversations. Anyway, they say, now, when Dad takes you out for lunch, he's going to ask you why you want to marry her. Okay, why do I want to marry her? And the right answer is because you love her. Okay, let me write this down, right? I'm so stupid, I can't figure this out. Because I love her, right? And a couple other questions, you know, we go through, we talk it through, we get ready for the big lunch with Roy. And so we go out, and sure enough, he asked that question, right? Why do you want to marry my daughter? And so in the best spontaneous response I could give, as though it were spontaneous, was, well, you know, because I love her. And I could see his smile, and that was good. Like, yes, hit a home run there. That's good. We're on our way. I had some more conversation. It was a good conversation. And then at the end, he says, now, there's one more question I want to ask you. I said, well, I've already passed the big test, right? This will be okay. And he says, do you like her? And when I was 23, I was kind of shocked by that question, and I thought it was kind of dumb or redundant, because in my mind I said, no, wait a minute. I already answered the big question correctly. I said I love her, and love trumps like, right? And so why do we even have to answer this question? But he wasn't taking no for an answer, right? And he said, do you like her? And all I have to say to you now is that 40 years after that conversation, he was spot on. And here's the reason why. He wanted to know if I genuinely liked being with her. That after the romance and after the wedding and after the ceremony and all the stuff was over, do I just day to day want to sit down and be with her and do life together with her, to drink coffee with her and to have conversations? Do you like her? And the reason I always thought was so important is this: you cannot have a personal relationship with someone you don't like. Now, you might think, well, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? But let me take it a step further, okay? And let me ask you this question. If I ask you, do you love God? All of you, hands raised, Cedarville perfect, yes, we love the Lord our God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. We learned that in Deuteronomy, right? Got it right, that's good. You're committed to Him, you want to follow His ways. At least you know what to say, even if you don't do it, right? But if I said to you, do you like God? You might be shocked by that, and you might think, well, why do we even have to answer that question? We love God, and love trumps like, right? And I would say, no, because you take heaven and hell and everything else out of it. If God were not God in heaven above, and it wasn't about salvation, is the person of God attractive enough to you? Would you like Him? And the reason I think that's so important is because you can have a business contract, you can have a covenant contract, but it's very difficult to have a personal relationship with someone that you don't like. A.W. Tozer has said it like this. He said, what comes into our minds when we think about God is the most important thing about us. And what Ecclesiastes is going to go after is, what do you think of God? And if you say, I don't have a deep personal relationship, maybe it's because down deep inside, you're in this because you don't want to go to hell, but there is nothing actually attractive about God because He seems like a fairly distant, repulsive, mean character to you. Is that what God is like? And Ecclesiastes is going to go after that kind of question. Now, a little patience here. It's going to take a while for us to actually get there. In fact, it's going to take us till throughout today and even into the next day to get to the answer to that question. But ultimately, that's where we're headed. All right? So I want you to know this is a really, really important study about God, theological study, but we're going to have to do our homework to get there. So here's where our homework starts. Right? I want to take you on a little bit of a journey about where I have been in my own understanding of this book, because I want you to have confidence that what I'm telling you is correct. So I'm going to tell you some mistakes I made along the way in trying to understand this book. Right? So follow with me on the journey so you can have confidence and know that what I'm telling you is really, really what the book is saying. So I'm going to introduce you to this guy named Bruce Waltke, who is probably a name you haven't heard, and that's okay. But part of the reason you haven't heard it is because he is a scholar. He is a Hebrew scholar, probably the leading one of our generation. Doesn't do a lot of popular work. He's not a pastor, but he's a scholar. And his opinion about Ecclesiastes is important to me, and it ought to be to you. And his opinion is this, that Ecclesiastes is the most misunderstood book in the entire Bible. I think that's probably true. The Old Schofield Reference Bible says this, that they are the conclusions and reasons of a man, not truth from God. Now, you may not have ever heard of that Bible before, but it's had an impact on you whether you know it or not. And here's why. Today, if you want to go get a good study Bible, and everybody ought to have at least one, if you want to get a good study Bible, you can go to the bookstore or any Christian bookstore, and you can find, I haven't counted out exactly, but you can probably find 20 really good ones, maybe 30 really good ones that will give you all the notes and the helps and the maps and the charts and stuff that are really, really helpful. But when I got ready to go to college and I wanted a good study Bible, I only had two choices. The two choices were a red Schofield study Bible or a black one. That was it. Because I didn't go to school in 1917, but when the Schofield Reference Bible was published in 1917 until about 1980, it was the only show in town. It was the only study Bible effectively there was. And seriously, I remember going to church various churches where the pastor would say, okay, everybody turn to page 817. And you can do that because everybody had this Bible. Now, it's not that way today, but it was that way for generations. And here's my point, that for generations from 1917 to 1980, generations and generations and generations of American Christians and a lot around the world who really were serious about Bible study had this Bible. And so they took the notes almost as gospel. And here's the perspective of the old Schofield Reference Bible. You see it right here. It says, inspiration sets down accurately what passes, but the conclusions and reasonings are, after all, man's. So what it's saying is Ecclesiastes inspired? Yes, because it's an accurate record of what they said, but it doesn't mean that it's true. Are you with me here? Kind of like looking at Satan's lies in Genesis 3. Is it inspired? Well, yes, it is, because God accurately, by the inspiration of the Spirit, records exactly what he said. Is what Satan said true? No. Right? So what we're doing here in Ecclesiastes, the way the Schofield Reference Bible approaches it is, well, these are the reasonings of a natural man. This is a book filled with the kind of reasoning that you want to avoid. This is what people who are far away from God come up with, and boy, isn't that ugly? Isn't that wrong? Isn't that wanting? So don't follow that way, all right? So you can see here that Ecclesiastes, that there's this inertia that gets developed over time, and people saying, oh yeah, avoid that book, or if you read it, don't take it seriously because it's not really truth from God. Well, here's the problem with that. The problem with that is, number one, Solomon is the author. Now, to be fair, the text does not actually say Solomon is the author, but it does say he was the son of David who was king in Jerusalem. That kind of narrows it down for me. And there are an awful lot of parallels between the author of this book and the way Solomon is described elsewhere in 1 Kings, like his money, his wisdom, his servants, and his building projects, okay? So I believe Solomon is the author, right? He's writing inspired truth. But more importantly, even if you don't agree with me on that, the conclusion of the book says, and I quote, these are delightful words and words of truth, right? Chapter 12, verse 10. They are like well-driven nails given by one shepherd. So the word for nails there is like this, not just a little nail, but a big nail you would drive into the side of the house, and then you could hang your coat on it, right? And what it's saying is, this is truth that you can hang your life on. And then, of course, it says given by one shepherd. Now, again, it doesn't take a barrel of brains, right, to figure out in ancient Israel who's the one shepherd, right? Psalm 23, Yahweh is my shepherd. So this is truth given by Yahweh for us. So if it is, I'm having a hard time with the way the Schofield Reference Bible and generations have understood this as simply an example of how not to think. So a couple years after I started studying this book, I came across this book of Ecclesiastes. Came across this book, Ecclesiastes Total Life, which is a little commentary by a guy named Walt Kaiser. Now again, that's probably not a name you're familiar with. Maybe you are. But you should be, because Walt Kaiser is, again, an eminent Old Testament scholar. And he's the president of a seminary, or was, and a pastor too. Again, he's up in years now, but he's actually been to Cedarville to speak in chapel. Just a great, great guy. And he wrote this little book that was only like 120 pages. And the first time I started to teach Ecclesiastes, I got all the commentaries, read them through, right? And they were all pretty negative, as I have described to you so far, about this is an example of how not to think. But I got to Kaiser's book, and it was very different. Kaiser was very, very positive. And let me show you what he says about this. He says, if you take a look at Solomon's life and chart it out, or at least his reign, he reigns from 970 to 930 BC, right? Reigns for 40 years. All the kings, Saul, David, and Solomon, reigned for 40 years, and so he does. And so if you take a look at the start of his reign, 970, and chart him out, is he close to God, is he near to God, or is he far away from God? How would you answer the question? When he starts out, is he close to God or far away? He's pretty close, right? He's pretty close because God says to him, hey, what do you want? And Solomon says, well, I'm really stupid. I'm pretty naive. I've never done this before. God, I just need your help. I need wisdom. And God says, wow, that's incredibly smart. That's good. And I will bless you and give you all sorts of good things, right? But then we also know that as Solomon progresses, there are these things like horses and gold and wives that we have read about in Deuteronomy 17 that he accumulates to his own destruction, his own hurt, against the admonitions of Deuteronomy 17. As 1 Kings says, his wives, foreign wives, turned his heart away from the Lord. And he was doing some really despicable things and worshiping some really despicable gods. But as 1 Kings 11 says, and as Kaiser says as well, God sends discipline against him, some armies against him, to turn him around, right? And to wake him up, as God does with all of us. And that Solomon responds well. So towards the end of his life, the little starburst there is where Kaiser is theorizing, and I think he's probably correct, where Solomon kind of turns around and decides to look back over his life and kind of write out his testimony. And in some ways, Ecclesiastes is that, right? It's his testimony. So he's looking back and he says, hey, you know, I want to tell you what it's like when your life is near to God and what it's like when your life is far away from God, the good and the bad, and tell you what this is like. And chapter 2, verses 24 to 26 is a really good summary of this. So take a look at 24 to 26 as a testimony of Solomon. And he says this, after I looked at my life, when I was close to God and far from God, here's what I found out. There is nothing better for man than to eat and drink and to tell himself that his labor is good. This also I have seen, that it is from the hand of God. So God is the one who enables people to enjoy their work. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him, right? God is the one who enables us to enjoy life. For the person who is good in his sight, he is given wisdom and knowledge and joy. That's all really, really positive. But then he says this, he has the yellow part too, right? The yellow text. While to the sinner, he's given the task of gathering and collecting so that he may give to the one who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the wind. So Kaiser's initial conclusion is this, that when you are near to God, you will enjoy life. And that when you are far away from God, you will experience the vanity of life, right? So we come back here to the chart then, and Solomon says, man, those times when I was close to God, I enjoyed life, and when I was far away from God, it was really empty. Now, I don't know how you respond to that personally, but I look at that and I resonate with that. And you probably can too, right? I can think some of the very best times of my life were when I was walking close with God, and God was God's, to quote the words of Job, God's intimate friendship was on my house, right? It was good. I also can say that some of the worst times of my life were when I've turned away from God and strayed from Him and done stupid things. It's like, oh man, the guilt and the horror, those were the worst time of life. So my initial response is to look at this and say, hey, this is really good. I like this. And so I did. I kind of adopted Kaiser's viewpoint, taught through the book like this for many years. But then I ran into a problem. And here was one of the problems. What I found out was that this idea of vanity, or meaninglessness, if you're using the NIV, is used most of the time to refer to all people, not just the sinner. Now, look at that carefully, because this is a mistake that many of you are going to make on your reaction papers. Are you ready for this? A lot of you are going to not listen real carefully to the message, and you're just going to get this superficial mistake, and you're going to say, what Solomon is saying is that when you're close to God, you have meaning in life, but when you're far away from God, you don't have meaning. There's no meaning in life apart from God. Now, that may be true, but that's not what this book is saying. Are you with me here? So listen carefully here. Here's what's going to happen. Look at this verse, verse 8. If a man live many years and rejoice in them all, yet let him remember the days of darkness, for they shall be many. All that comes is vanity. Now, according to this verse, the older you get, the more you're going to experience vanity. Now, does that mean that the older you get, the farther you get away from God? Well, that's what it would mean, but is that true? No. I mean, all of us know, I hope, know godly people in our churches that are prayer warriors, and the older they get, you're just amazed at how they've become kind and more like Jesus himself, and you say, man, as I age, I want that to happen to me, right? And then he says this in chapter 12, verses 7 and 8. Then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it, right? He's talking about everybody dying. Vanity, vanity, says the preacher, all is vanity. Now, do just people far away from God die? Obviously, no. All of us die. This is a fate which all of us are going to experience. So, let me correct this mistaken idea here for a second and say this. Kaiser is right when he says that God gives the ability to enjoy life and is pleased when we do so. But, and here's the but you got to remember, whatever this vanity is, everybody, not just the sinner, is getting a full dose of it, right? So, again, it may be true that life apart from God is not very meaningful, but that's not the message here. Remember? So it's kind of like we did with Job and James. James has a legitimate message to speak, but don't whitewash Job with that message or you'll miss the message of Job. So listen carefully here. This vanity is getting everybody, the good guy and the bad guy. Kaiser has found a nugget of truth here, but he hasn't captured the whole thing. So where do we go from here? Well, here's where we're going to go. I think all this shows us how important it is to understand what vanity or meaningless actually means. Now again, I know this is a little bit tedious. You're probably saying, well, just tell me the right answer. But number one, you're getting a Bible minor. You've got to know more than just superficial answers. You've got to know how we get to those answers. You've got to know why the wrong answers are wrong and why the right answers are right? So you got to work hard here with me. 2 Timothy 2:15, right? Work hard. Don't be ashamed. Be a workman who can rightly understand the word of truth. So stay with me. It'll be worth it in the end, okay? So when it comes to understanding vanity, we are kind of clued in that this is a key to the book. And the way we're clued in is the way the book starts and ends with vanity. You can open up your Bibles if you want to. You don't have to. It's pretty easy to see right here. Again, I've got the NIV, so you can see what I've done. I've taken meaningless and marked it out and put it in vain because I think it's a better word. I'll more on that later. But notice that we start out here, meaningless, meaningless, says the teacher, utterly meaningless, everything is meaningless. Or vanity, vanity, all is vanity, everything is vanity. It says it 4 or 5 times, right? And then when you get to the very end of the book, he's going to do the same thing, right? He finishes like this, vanity, vanity, says the teacher, all is vanity. So beginning and end, he's really talking about this book and this word, and he talks about a lot of it in between, so you know this is really, really critical. One of the most important things in Bible study is knowing when to do a word study. This is a good time to do a word study, right? You can tell right here. So what does it mean? Well, from the dictionary, it means this. Number one, not meaningless. Let's just get that one out of our vocabulary. You guys have your Bibles open here, or do you remember what it says? Let's just take a quick poll. NIV says meaningless, right? Any ESVs here? What's the word? Who's got it? Verse 2. It's vanity, isn't it? Yeah, verse 2 is vanity. New American Standard? Anybody? Vanity? Any King James? What other translations do you guys have? Do you know what you're reading? Anybody, any King James people here? I'm pretty sure King James says vanity as well. All right, yeah. Yeah, okay, all right. So vanity is actually a good word I want to stick with. I don't want you to think of it as looking in front of a mirror and that sort of vain, or you're so vain you probably think the song is about you. Not that kind of thing. But it's a little bit more vague. Meaningless is too specific here. It doesn't mean that, but it does mean this. Transience or perplexity or vapor. Right? So things that are here are like smoke, or like on a cold day when you speak and you can see your breath, but then it's gone really quickly, okay? So where does this come from? This is kind of the meaning, but what does it mean here? And there are a couple other places in Scripture where the big theological concept is defined, and there are 3 that I think are critical for us. The first one is in Romans chapter 8. So look with me, Romans chapter 8, then we're going to go on to Genesis 3. And then Ecclesiastes chapter 3. So first of all, Romans 8. It says this. Paul is speaking about the future when Jesus comes back and reverses the curse. And in that context, he says, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. The creation waits in eager expectation for the sons of God to be revealed. What he's saying is, the creation is waiting for that day when the sons of God, those of us who are saved now, when Jesus comes back, and we will completely get rid of our sinful nature. And we will be revealed as the people who we are. Our true identity will show up, right? Because when our true identity shows up and the sons of God are revealed, then the creation, which was subjected to vanity, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it in hope, the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into glorious freedom of the children of God. Now, I hope you can recapture that whole picture we talked about in the very beginning. Remember, when Adam was in a right relationship with God, the earth was in a right relationship with him. When Adam rebels against God, what does God do with the ground? He makes the ground rebel against Adam, right? So the curse that God puts on the ground is rebelling against Adam because Adam has rebelled against God. This is the opposite of that. When Adam gets in a right relationship with God, when all of us, when the sons of God are revealed, then the earth will suddenly settle down and be submissive again in the future as it was in the beginning. So when we talk here about this vanity in verse 20, the creation was subjected to vanity. Let me describe it like this, or define it like this. The trouble which comes from the curse of Genesis 3. Now, that might seem rather vague, but I think it's probably the very best understandable definition that'll help you through this book. Whenever you see vanity, whenever you see meaningless, think of the trouble which comes from the curse of Genesis 3. Now, what is that trouble? Well, let's go back and look at it. Let's go back and look at the trouble, which comes from Genesis 3, and you can see it in Genesis 3. Then to Adam he said, cursed is the ground because of you. In toil you shall eat of it all the days of your life. Both thorns and thistles it will grow for you. By the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. So what was really fun, enjoyable work now becomes sweaty, futility, frustrating toil. And then, if that's not bad enough, till you return to the ground because from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. He is going to die. Now again, this is old material. We've been through it before, right? But the frustration and the work which the curse causes and the death which the curse causes are pretty good description here to get us started. Notice that phrase, for you are dust, and to dust you will return. It's the ultimate bottom line of the curse. And you're going to see it again. You're going to see it again right here in Ecclesiastes 3. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast, for all is vanity. Now, before I get to my main point about the red stuff here, let me just throw in a quick disclaimer. When you read verse 19, you look at that, and it appears as though Solomon is saying, well, people don't live forever. Your life is over just like the beast. And you say, that's not right. And again, this is one of the reasons why people come to Ecclesiastes and say, those are just the reasonings of an unsaved man. He does not have an eternal perspective. That's not true. What Solomon is saying right here is he's talking about under the sun. He's talking about life under the sun. He's talking about life right now between birth and death. And he's saying as far as that is concerned, you don't have any advantage over the animal. That stupid animal that can't make it across the road is going to get hit and die, and guess what? Here's the bad news. You are too. No matter how smart you are, no matter how fast you are, you're going to die too. All go to the same place, all came from dust, and all return to the dust. How's that for cheering up your day? Sorry about that, but this is the truth that he's talking about, that we're all going to die. So, under the sun, another one of his favorite phrases, means as far as life right now is concerned, the curse will get you just like it gets roadkill. And that is true, isn't it? Just like that stupid animal dies, all of us are going to die. Would we all acknowledge we're all going to die? Yeah, okay. So you say, wow, this is really exciting, really fun. I can't wait to share this. Hold on, it'll get better, right? So let me give you a fuller definition then. As you're reading through and you see this word vanity, what do you think? Well, here's a fuller definition of the word. It is the futility, the frustration, the limitation, and ultimately death, which every person, I'm speaking to you, Walt Kaiser, right? Which every person, not just the ungodly, but even the godly too, every person experiences as a result of living in a sin-cursed world. Or succinctly, we can just call it this: life as a result of the curse. Now, I will admit that up to this point, this has been an awful lot of academic chatter that may not seem very relevant, but let me try to make it more relevant. Let me try to make it more practical and explain what this is. Because this is one of those hard times that's like trying to explain water to a fish. The stuff that is all around you, you become so used to, you hardly notice it anymore. So let me be really specific about what life as a result of the curse is. And it's not just your death, which is not going to happen for 50 years, 60 or 70 years, hopefully. Not just that. It's not just that far off thing. It's this: flat tires. Now, your first response is probably, really? Seriously? Flat tires? That's not a very spiritual thing. Oh, but it is. But it's a part of real life. And if you haven't ever had one, that's good for you. But if you've had one, it can be really frustrating, right? Especially if it happens at a critical time. It's like, oh no, you're out here in the interstate, it's cold outside and you can't get the lug nuts off, and it's just, oh, there are people passing by. It's a really annoying thing. Just one example. Maybe that hasn't touched you, maybe this one has. Broken relationships. Some of you are saying, oh man, I wish I had a relationship which could be broken if I don't even have a relationship. Right? Maybe we're getting a little closer to home now, right? Bad weather, amen? Wouldn't you just like to see the sunshine? Oh, it's so nice the last couple of days to see some sunshine. Ecclesiastes talks about that. It says it's really good for a man to see the sun. And man, it is so nice. Some really good weather would be nice. How about the flu or mono? Anybody here? Well, hopefully not. Hopefully you're home recuperating. But bad breath? Anybody here? Oh, come on. Right? Isn't that why you carry gum with you? Yeah, so you talk like this and say, I'm sorry about the coffee I had this morning. Yeah, don't we all have that? Don't we all suffer? Yes, right? Cancer? And now your response is probably, wait a minute. Well, hold on. You're putting bad breath and cancer on the same page? Yes, because that happens to all of us. The bad breath and the cancer. How many people know someone, a loved one, who's had cancer, where you hear the C word and it's like, oh, man, on top of everything else. And you put the whole picture together and it starts to become overwhelming. You say, man, it's everywhere. And Solomon says, yes, it's everywhere. That's what I'm talking about. Bills bigger than a paycheck. One of the worst things that ever happened to me, one of the worst realizations I ever had, was when I finally got a good paying job and I thought, wow, I'm making this much money. That's great. I can't believe it. I've never made this much money in my life. And then I started adding up my bills and I realized my bills were $2,000 more than my paycheck. It's like, wait a minute, this is no fun. I threw away the budget. It was probably a dumb thing to do, but it's just discouraging. I'm making this money, but then everybody wants it, right? Car accidents, death of a parent, death of a friend, death of me. Now, this is the kind of stuff that Solomon means when he says vanity. So when you see this plastered all over this book, vanity of vanities, this is what he's talking about. This is going to touch your life. Now here's the kind of the weird thing about this book, and that is that some of you, by God's good providence and mercy, have experienced very little of what's up here on the screen. And I got to admit, when I was in college, that's the way my life was. Nothing bad had ever happened to me, never broken a bone. None of my loved ones had ever died. No one had ever had a bad disease. I mean, life was kind of charmed, right? Others of you are way too familiar with the stuff that's up on the screen. Some of you have had parents or grandparents that you love die. Some of you have had friends who have died. Some of you deal with chronic diseases and pain in your body that nobody else knows about, but you deal with every day, and it hurts. Right? And so, to the degree that you've experienced some of this stuff up here, it is also kind of a gauge of your interest in the solutions you're going to find in the book. And again, for some of you who haven't experienced these things, it may seem fairly academic, but just wait, and I hate to say this, but it's true, these will come. As the verses we've already read, all that is to come is vanity. The curse is going to get you. The curse is going to win. The curse is going to be the ultimate victor in your life until Jesus, the ultimate victor, comes back and puts it away. But unless Jesus comes back, right now, the curse is going to win. So the older you get, the more you will experience these things. So then where is Solomon taking us? What is Solomon's goal? And I like to use this chart because Solomon has the big picture in mind. He knows that Eden is perfect. He knows that there will be a kingdom in the future where life is perfect once again. And he knows that up here on this level, life is perfect. But what he wants to talk about is right now in this little box where we live under the sun, where the curse is going to win. Now, why is that important? Here's why it's so important. Because it's very easy to want to be down here in the curse, in this box, and when things get hot down here, it's very easy to want to throw a big lifeline out to the kingdom. But that's a really hollow way to live. And here's why. If you've ever been one of those people who's looking into a casket where your loved one is, and this is me a couple years ago with my mom in the casket, right? And you're standing there at the line, and people walk by, and it's always awkward because no one knows what to say at funerals, but people do the best they can, and they say, well, at least you'll see them again someday. Let me just say that I believe in the resurrection with all my heart. There is no doubt in my mind that Jesus is coming back and he's going to raise us from the dead. But can I also say that when you're standing there and it's your loved one in the casket and someone says, well, we'll see him again someday, that really stinks. That's really hollow. Well, do we grieve like others who have no hope? No, we don't, but we do grieve. And to say, well, it's okay, it's no problem, we'll see him again someday, as though that will solve the pain of the curse, is incredibly theologically naive. The curse and death are real enemies. And when you experience those things, it really, really hurts, and you can't just throw a safety line up to the kingdom and say, well, it'll all be better someday, just hold your breath for the next 60 years and wait till the kingdom comes. That's really hard to do. And so what Solomon's going to do is he's not going to say, oh, let's just throw the safety line in and say, it'll all be better when Jesus comes back. He's going to say, okay, given the fact that this is what we have right now, how does God want us to approach life in the curse? And that's a different set of answers than the other one. The other one's true, but he's going to talk about right now. So what we got here is to show us how to approach life after Eden and before the kingdom right now during this time. This is a no-spin zone. This is a no-pad answers allowed zone. How do you conceive of God? What kind of God is he? Is he good? Is he the kind of God who you'd want to be your friend if this is the way he has ordered life now? And so Solomon's going to take up that idea, because if you start to picture God through the murkiness of the curse, you can get a really distorted view of who God is. So we're going to try to understand who is God in the midst of this cursed time. All right? So that's where we're headed, and we're going to start with this. A survey of the book and the introduction here in the first 11 chapters. Now, I love this book. I love the way it's written. It's one of those books that is so complex, like almost every Bible book, like every really good movie. If you have a really good movie, you don't get it the first time. There are way too many clues you don't pick up on the first time until you've seen the whole. And you have to watch it over and over and over again, and then you say, oh, I never saw that clue. I never, right? Because that's the way a really good piece is written here. And so let me go back to chapter 1, verses 1 to 11, and try to read this with an understanding of having read through the book a lot and see how Solomon would say it, right? So he starts out like this. And his major point, his first big idea is, of course, vanity, vanities, laments the teacher, absolute vanity, everything is vanity. And if I can paraphrase it, he's saying this, look, all of life is affected by the curse. It's everywhere, just like we've said before. The curse and all those things which come from it, the bad breath and the cancer and the toil and the frustration and the broken relationships, it's just everywhere. All of life is affected by the curse. And then he goes on to say this. He begins his argument. He said, what are you talking about? Why do you say that? He says, well, for example, think about this. What does man gain from all his labor at which he toils under the sun? A generation comes and a generation goes, but the earth remains forever. Now, if you simply look at this as though it is just sort of sing-songy poetry, you'll miss the point, right? I don't think that Solomon would say, generation comes, generation goes, the earth remains forever. Oh, isn't that cute? Isn't that profound? No. Having read the book several times, let me just say, if we invited Solomon back here to read the book for us, here's how I think he would read it. I think he was incredibly angry when he wrote this. I think he would have said it like this. What does man gain from all his labor which he toils under the sun? A generation comes and a generation goes, but the earth remains forever. Right? And we would probably look at him and say, dude, what's your problem? Why are you so excited about this? And he'd say, don't you understand how wrong that is? And we'd say, no, that's just the way it is, right? And Solomon would say, no, that's the way it is, but that's not the way it's supposed to be. That's the world turned upside down. That's what it looks like with a curse on it. This is wrong. It's not the way it's supposed to be. The earth just keeps going. And then he says a bunch of things that people just tend to pass off as silly truisms, but they really fit his argument. He says this, Genesis chapter 1. Then God said, let us make man in our image, our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. And here's why he says this. Because in the beginning, when God created everything, Adam and Eve were supposed to rule over, right? So the point is this, that on days 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, he sets this stage up, right? The earth. And then on day number 6, he puts man and Adam and Eve there to rule over things, and they are like the pinnacle of creation. I don't know if I've ever told you this before, but we used to have this class over in the theater. We didn't have tables, wasn't nearly as nice, but it was kind of fun in that as you had class throughout the semester, you could watch the set being built. And it was kind of fun because we get more ornate and you could see the whole thing come together and then it all get painted. It was really kind of beautiful. But no one ever came over just to look at the set. Right? The only reason you would come is when the actors got out on the stage. And Solomon's trying to say here, God makes this earth for 5 or 6 days, and then he puts Adam and Eve here, who are the actors, the main players on the stage, to rule over it. And here's the problem. What it looks like now is this. It's like the earth has become this big thing, and the actors are kind of behind it, because it's really hard to rule over when you're 6 feet under. When there is death, it kind of messes everything up. And here's how he says that. He says the sun, verse 5, does this. Verse 5, the sun rises and the sun sets and hurries back to where it rises. Oh, wow, profound. I didn't know that was true. Verse 6, the wind blows to the south and turns to the north. Around and around it goes, ever returning on its course. And then the rivers. Verse 7, all streams flow into the sea, yet the sea is never full. To the place the streams come from, there they return again. Now, you look at that and think, what's the point of that? And what Solomon is saying is this. Here's the problem. Adam and Eve were like the actors. The earth is just the stage. But now, since the curse comes, guess what happens? The actors die, and the earth just keeps going like the Energizer Bunny. The sun keeps going, the wind keeps going, the rivers keep going. It's like the earth is eternal and people are temporal. You say, well, yeah, that's the way it is, right? And he says, no. This death is an intruder. That was never supposed to happen. And the problem, as you can see in verse 11, where he kind of summarizes, is this. There is no remembrance of men of old, and even those who are yet to come, will not be remembered by those who follow. Nobody remembers people. See, this is his big problem. People die off because of the curse, and we don't live forever. Now, again, you might think, well, that's just normal, right? Well, when was the last time one of your loved ones died? Because when that happens, there's this deep grief. You say, man, this is just not the way things are supposed to be. I can remember the very first time I taught this. Just very quickly here. The very first time I taught this, I'll never forget, it was in 1983, November 22nd. And that was a big day for me. It was not my anniversary, it was not my birthday, but I had a class, and the class is actually bigger than this one. There's about 400 people in the class. And I said, how many of you know why November 22nd, 1983 is a big day? And out of 400 people, only 4 people raised their hand. I said, really? You don't know? Four people said, yeah, this is the anniversary of the assassination of JFK. I was like, wow, I couldn't believe that. Because I was there when he got shot. Not there, but I remember the news reports. It was like the ultimate big, huge national and international tragedy. November 22nd, I still remember that. Every time the calendar comes up, it's like, wow, I can't forget that, because I remember what a big, big, big international deal that was. 20 years later, nobody knew. Oh my goodness, this is really true. The earth comes, a generation comes, a generation goes, but the earth just keeps spinning. So then I had to come up with a new illustration. And a couple years ago, this was a really, really good illustration. That there were lights there where there used to be towers. And now the trouble with that is, how old were you when 9/11 happened? Right. It's just a history book thing for you. You don't care, you don't remember, right? It's like 3,000 people died that day. The world changed that day. But here's the biggest deal. It's not just history here. Someday, a big tragedy, national tragedy, is going to happen like that again. And then we'll have a tragedy, then we'll have an illustration for a little while, but not for long. But here's the biggest tragedy, and that is this. I've introduced you to my grandson, Hunter, and to my dad, his great-grandpa. And his great-grandpa was, without exaggeration, one of the guys who defined what the greatest generation was all about. Can't even tell you what an amazing guy he is. And what really grieves my heart is that Hunter will never get to know his great-grandpa. Never know what an incredible man of God he was and how he blessed the entire family. And Solomon says, you know, when you start thinking about that, it really, really stinks. A generation comes and generation goes, but the earth just keeps going. There's something fundamentally wrong. Next time, we'll look at his solution.